Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone ask me in the comments, hey Jason, if we wanted to run conjugate but we could only get in the gym 3 days a week and we didn't want to do just the upper lower version and spread it out, is there a way we could do full body, such as doing dynamic effort, all of it in one day? And that's an interesting question, and here's what I'm going to say on that. How should you structure something like that? Totally doable, but here's what I would do. I would go ahead and run the max effort days as normal. In other words, you're going to need a max effort lower and a max effort upper day, and you're going to need to stack a lot of volume in those days. Meaning you need to hit some sort of bench press to a max, and you probably need to do a very, very high volume training session afterwards. You're going to need a lot of supplemental lifts. Because if you're only going to train 3 days a week and you're not a ranked novice, you've got to make those days count. So I would say you need to be hitting your maximum recoverable volume after that max bench press day. And you could do that on something like Monday. So what does that mean? Well, you're going to need to do all your tricep work, chest work. You're going to need upper back work, bicep work, whatever it is that you're going to do. You would literally want to do something very similar to what my bench press days look like. Which is oftentimes some board presses, dips, JM presses, inverted rows, some other sort of row, hammer curls, all that stuff. You're going to probably want to do at least 20 total sets of various supplemental lifts after doing that max bench press session. And that would be absolutely warranted because you're only training 3 days a week. You really need to be hitting your maximum volumes. And so it would end up being like an upper, lower, full body. So what about the other max effort day? Well, you would want to do the normal sort of training. I would recommend that you pick some sort of squat to do 1 week and then some sort of deadlift the next week. Now, you could, of course, do a good morning in there every now and then, like they do at Westside, but they don't usually go to a 1 rep max. They learned oftentimes that taking that to a 3 rep max is warranted, which we wouldn't normally do on a max effort list. I would normally recommend people do a max triple on a squat, deadlift, things like that. But the good morning, it's probably more warranted. And you guys see me just rotating through here, the sort of stuff I'm talking about, my lift variations for maxes. You'll see my speed work up above right there. That was max bench. So you're going to want to do all that. You're going to want to do some sort of max effort lower body lift. And again, I usually recommend week to week rotating a squat and a pull. That's how I usually do it. That's how I program my own lifters. Then you're going to want to do a ton of good mornings. Okay, that lower body day, doing good mornings is going to be essential. Probably 5 sets. Because you're not going to really get a good number of good mornings in later. You're going to have to go to a full body on the other day, and you may not have time for good mornings. You need to make them count. You need to push it hard on that day. You need to do whatever other supplemental lifts you're going to do for your low body. That's generally going to be hamstring work, whatever quad work you're going to do. I don't care whether it's hip belt squats, machine squats, whatever you're going to do for quads. If you're going to do extra quad work, you may not need it. Definitely hamstring work. Okay, because we're not going to get a lot of supplemental lifts on the other dynamic effort day. You're going to want to do extra hamstring work. Go ahead and take your hamstrings to their maximum recoverable volume that day. Probably some additional back work. Rows, pull-ups, whatever you're going to do. But you're going to need to hit your lower body really hard, and it's not just going to be a max and go home. You're going to have to do a lot of volume. Again, you could look to what I do as guidelines. What have you guys seen me do lately? A lot of good mornings, a lot of Pendlay rows, a lot of reverse hypers. It's generally what I do. And I'm still going to say that you're going to want to run the normal progression. So let's say you're going to try to do something like this on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You need the max bench day first. Okay, do it on Monday. The max squat and deadlift day, or just want to call it the max lower day, you're probably going to want to do on Wednesday. And the main thing is that even if you were to run a different thing besides Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the main thing is that you want to do the max bench day before the max squat or deadlift day, because you're not going to be able to do the max bench after the other usually. Right? You're too fatigued, but your upper body fatigue isn't going to affect your lower body the same. So that's why we do it that way. So in my case, that's usually max bench on Monday, max squat or deadlift on Tuesday, but I do a 4-day split. So the max effort work is going to look like normal max effort days with as much volume as you can handle for supplemental work. Because again, you're only going to hit each body part really twice a week doing this, and a lot of it's going to get jammed into the last day, which isn't going to be the same volume. So what you're going to have to do to make this system work as a 3-day system, you're going to have to do all the dynamic work on the last day, which means you're going to have to do your 3-week pendulum wave on the box squat for speed, speed pulls, and then speed benching. Now that could be, depending on how you're programming it, up to 12 sets of each. You're not going to have a lot of energy left. Normally people say, but Jason, didn't you say that usually even though you get out of breath or people get out of breath, they're fatigued from speed work, that they feel good after? Yeah, but you've done it on 3 different exercises, not just 1 or 2. And that's usually going to take a pretty good chunk of your time. You're going to be a good 45 minutes deep. And you're probably not, because if you're on that sort of time frame, you're probably not going to have time to hook up a lot of bands and chains unless it's really organized at your gym. I mean, the way it's organized even in my home gym, but even then there's setup time for all that. 3 different lifts, it might be awkward. You could probably do it if you get efficient with it. And what about afterwards? You're probably going to want to do some rows, because you're going to need the upper back work. At least you've trained everything else but the upper and mid back. So I would say you need to do rows. And I don't care what sort of rows. I'd recommend Pendlay rows. But if Pendlay rows are not an option for you, maybe your low back is really fatigued, maybe some inverted rows, some sort of chest supported rows. But I would say probably 5 sets of rows of some type. Because again, everything else has been worked on that day. And again, upper back, middle back, all those things tend to be our weak links for a lot of lifters. And you really can't have a back that's too well developed as far as getting strong and jacked, particularly for getting strong. It carries over to everything. And again, this is the area that hasn't received much in the way of real work. It's got a lot of stabilizing work, but you haven't really worked it in a dynamic manner. So again, I would almost recommend the Pendlay rows because of their explosive nature on that day with the other movements. And that's generally how I would do it. It would only be 4 exercises, but you've got to realize how much workload you will have done, because it's going to be something like 8 to 12 sets of speed squats off a box. Same number of speed pulls, same number of speed bench. If you do 5 sets of rows, you pretty much have stimulated a very significant amount of muscle growth, all the adaptation we want for the speed training, all of that in one session. So really what we would be doing if you were to try to cram it into 3 days like this is you would be running your other days as normal conjugate type training, right? You would have your 2 max effort days. And as I said, you cram all the speed work into the one day and put some rows in. Now, people say, well, couldn't everyone just do it this way? Well, you could, but you need to keep in mind what's your total weekly volume going to look like. Is it going to be the same as if you ran a 4-day? No, of course not. Because normally, instead of just rows, we do a bunch of supplemental work, right? We do tons of supplemental work after the speed days. So you're losing all of that, right? You're just getting some rows in. So because we're doing 3 days instead of 4, we are losing an entire day's worth of supplemental work for the entire week. So it's not going to be ideal. You're not going to maximize growth, right? We're not going to maximize growth because we really need 4 days to do that in an ideal environment. It's a compromise. And what's the compromise really at? The compromise is off the supplemental lifts, because you're doing the same amount of max work. You're doing the same amount of speed work. We're just losing a full day worth of supplemental lifts. And that may matter because you could be losing your board presses. You could be losing a full day's worth of board presses or tricep work, a full day worth of chest work, a full day worth of extra hamstring work. Yes, we're getting hamstring work off of the speed squats and the speed pulls, but it's not the same amount as if we're doing a bunch of good mornings and hamstring curls and things like that. Glute ham raises. We're not getting all of that in there. We're getting a very limited amount. And I'm not saying it won't cause growth, but it's certainly not maximizing it. So could you make it work? Sure, we could make it work. You could make it work, but you need to keep in mind you are losing some of the supplemental volume. And you have to remember that a system like this still thrives on that supplemental volume for most people. You need it to maximize hypertrophy. So there is a compromise to be made, and it's going to be slower gains, but it is doable. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.